Have you ever met someone who felt too familiar? Like the moment you saw them, something in your soul whispered, "This must be fate." But months, maybe years later, all that's left is confusion, pain, and a question that haunts your quiet moments. Was it real? Or was I just projecting my wounds onto a stranger? Today, we're going to find out if that person was truly your fated love or just your shadow in disguise. Some loves don't feel logical. They arrive like storms, uninvited, yet unforgettable. They crash into your carefully constructed life and leave everything rearranged. You can't explain why you felt so deeply, so quickly. Why their laugh made your chest tight. Why you memorized the way they said your name. Why they stayed in your mind long after they left your life. Like a song you can't quite remember but can't stop humming. These connections feel fated, like the universe conspired to place them in your path. Like all the coincidences, all the timing, all the magnetic pull was orchestrated by something bigger than chance. But Jung's work warns us of something crucial. Not everything intense is destiny. Sometimes what we call fate is just a deeply embedded emotional pattern begging for resolution. Sometimes the person who feels like the one is actually a mirror reflecting our unhealed wounds back at us. This isn't about cynicism. It's about clarity. Because when you can distinguish between true fated love and unconscious projection, you stop chasing ghosts and start recognizing the real thing. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll trace the invisible threads between attraction, shadow, and what Jung called our soul contracts. The relationships that are truly meant to transform us. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was 28 when she met David at a bookstore. Not online, not through friends, in person, reaching for the same book on psychology. The coincidence felt cosmic. David was charming, emotionally unavailable, and brilliant. He would text her at 2 a.m. with philosophical questions, then disappear for days. Sarah found herself checking her phone obsessively, analyzing every word, every pause, every silence. This has to mean something, she told her friends. The universe doesn't just put someone in your life like this. But here's what Sarah didn't understand then. Jung taught that we don't just fall in love with a person. We fall in love with the part of ourselves they reflect. If you grew up feeling unseen, you'll crave the one who looks at you like you finally matter. If you learned that love comes with anxiety, you'll chase those who make you perpetually uncertain. If you were raised to believe your worth comes from earning affection, you'll be drawn to those who withhold it. Sarah's father was a brilliant man who showed love through intellectual challenges and emotional distance. David wasn't her soulmate. He was her father in a younger body, offering her another chance to finally be enough. This is what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious pain we've buried, the emotional patterns we've never examined, the parts of ourselves we've disowned. These patterns don't just disappear because we want them to. They disguise themselves as longing. They masquerade as fate. Fated love isn't about fantasy. It's about recognition. But recognition of what? Your shadow, your unconscious pain, your unmet needs for approval, safety, or redemption. That's why certain people feel so magnetic and so painful. They're not just attractive to you. They're activating something primal in your nervous system. Something that says, this time, I'll get it right. This time, I'll be chosen. Pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Think about your own attractions, the people who made you feel like you were losing your mind. What pattern do you see? What wound were they touching? Sarah spent 2 years trying to decode David's mixed signals, convinced that if she could just be patient enough, understanding enough, interesting enough, he would finally see her worth. But here's the devastating truth. If your nervous system is dysregulated in their presence, if you lose your voice, your values, your inner peace, you must ask yourself, am I in love or am I reenacting a wound? Jung spoke of something called the transcendent function, the psychological process that bridges the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. True love, he believed, serves this function. It helps us integrate our shadow, not by confirming our worst fears about ourselves, but by holding space for our wholeness. Sarah's relationship with David wasn't transcendent. It was repetitive. She wasn't growing. She was shrinking. She wasn't integrating her shadow. She was being consumed by it. The signs were everywhere. She stopped writing, something she'd loved since childhood, because David made subtle comments about her amateur style. She canceled plans with friends because David might call. She found herself adopting his political views, his taste in music, his way of speaking. She was disappearing into the relationship, not because it was so beautiful, but because she didn't know how to exist without external validation. This is the shadow masquerading as love. It asks you to betray yourself in service of being chosen. Take out your phone or a piece of paper. Write down 3 things you changed about yourself in your last intense relationship. What parts of yourself did you abandon? What does this tell you about your shadow? But here's where the story gets interesting, and where Jung's wisdom becomes transformative. Sarah's breaking point came not when David finally rejected her, but when she realized she had rejected herself. She was sitting in her car after another confusing conversation with him, and she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. Where was the woman who used to write poetry, who had strong opinions about social justice, who laughed loudly and took up space? "I don't even know who I am anymore," she whispered. And in that moment, something shifted. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, the moment when we confront the depth of our self-abandonment. It's painful, but it's also sacred, because it's the beginning of individuation. Here's the truth that will change everything. Fated love does not confuse you. It awakens you. It doesn't demand that you shrink to fit into someone else's vision of who you should be. It holds space for your truth, even when that truth is inconvenient, even when it challenges them, even when it means you need to grow in ways that scare you both. You'll know it's real not because they make you feel euphoric. Euphoria is often just relief from anxiety, but because you feel whole, even in silence, even in disagreement, even when you see their flaws clearly and love them anyway. This is what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, not just who you think you should be. And here's what most people don't understand. Individuation cannot happen in isolation. We need relationship to show us our blind spots, to mirror our unconscious patterns, to love us into wholeness. But there's a crucial difference between relationships that serve individuation and relationships that serve our shadow. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus met Elena at a meditation retreat. Unlike Sarah's story, there was no dramatic cosmic coincidence. Elena was sitting alone, reading, and Marcus was drawn to her quiet presence. But what drew him wasn't her beauty or her mystery. It was her self-possession. She looked comfortable in her own skin, comfortable with her own company. She wasn't performing for anyone. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours. Not because they were trying to impress each other, but because they were genuinely curious about each other's inner worlds. Elena challenged Marcus's assumptions about success. She asked him questions he'd never considered. What would you do if money wasn't a factor? What brings you joy, not just achievement? When you feel most like yourself? These weren't pickup lines or conversation starters. They were invitations to self-reflection. Marcus found himself talking about things he'd never shared with anyone. His childhood dreams of being an artist, his fear that he was living someone else's life, his longing for work that felt meaningful rather than just profitable. Elena didn't try to fix him or offer solutions. She simply listened with the kind of presence that made him feel seen. When Elena shared her own struggles, her battle with anxiety, her complicated relationship with her mother, her fear of not being good enough, Marcus felt honored by her trust, not burdened by her problems. Marcus supported Elena's dream of starting a nonprofit, even though it meant she'd have less time for their relationship and less financial security. When Marcus shared his history of depression, Elena didn't try to fix him or run away. She listened. She asked thoughtful questions. She held space for his pain without making it about her. She didn't say things like, "You should just think positive," or "Have you tried meditation?" She said things like, "That sounds really hard," and "What helps you when you're in that place?" When Elena talked about her complicated relationship with her mother, Marcus didn't offer solutions. He offered presence. He didn't try to convince her to forgive or forget. He simply witnessed her experience. Their conflicts weren't about who was right or wrong, but about understanding each other's perspectives. When Marcus felt triggered by Elena's need for alone time, instead of accusing her of being distant, he asked himself, "What is this bringing up in me?" What he found was an old wound, the fear that love always leads to abandonment. His mother had been emotionally unavailable, showing love through worry and control rather than presence and acceptance. In his family, need was seen as weakness, and distance was the only safety. But instead of making Elena responsible for healing this wound, he took responsibility for his own healing. Elena's need for space wasn't rejection, it was self-care. And Marcus's healing journey wasn't about convincing Elena to need less space. It was about healing his own abandonment wound. This is fated love. It doesn't enable your shadow patterns. It illuminates them so you can heal them. Here's what made their relationship different from Sarah's experience with David. When Marcus shared his vulnerabilities, Elena moved closer, not further away. When Elena expressed her needs, Marcus supported them instead of taking them personally. When they disagreed, they got curious about each other's perspectives instead of trying to be right. When they were triggered, they took responsibility for their own healing instead of blaming each other. When they felt scared, they shared their fears instead of acting them out. If this distinction is hitting something deep in you, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like looking in a mirror, but it's a mirror that shows you who you really are, not who you're afraid you might be. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But most of us spend our lives becoming who we think we need to be loved. Fated love breaks this cycle. It says, "I see you." Not the version of you that you think you need to be, but the version of you that you actually are. And that person is worthy of love. When Marcus looked at Elena, he didn't see a project to fix or a prize to win. He saw a whole human being, complex, sometimes difficult, always growing. And Elena saw the same in him. Their love wasn't about completion, the toxic idea that another person can fill the holes in your soul. It was about recognition, the sacred experience of being seen and accepted in your fullness. Jung believed that certain relationships are written in the stars, not because they're destined to be easy, but because they're destined to help us become who we're meant to be. These relationships don't save you from your shadow. They help you integrate it. They don't rescue you from your pain. They help you transform it. They don't complete you. They help you remember that you are already complete. Marcus and Elena's relationship wasn't without challenges. Elena's work schedule was demanding, and she often came home exhausted and needing space. Marcus struggled with anxiety during stressful periods at work, sometimes becoming withdrawn and irritable. They had different communication styles, different love languages, different ways of processing conflict. Elena was more direct and confrontational when upset, while Marcus tended to withdraw and process internally. Elena needed physical affection to feel loved, while Marcus expressed love through acts of service. Elena was a morning person who liked to talk through problems immediately, while Marcus was a night owl who needed time to think before discussing emotional issues. But instead of seeing these differences as problems to solve, they saw them as opportunities to grow. They learned to speak each other's emotional languages. They developed tools for navigating conflict without losing sight of their love for each other. When Elena was stressed, Marcus learned to offer physical comfort first and practical solutions second. When Marcus was anxious, Elena learned to give him space to process before asking him to talk. Most importantly, they never asked each other to be different than who they were. They supported each other's growth, but they didn't demand it as a condition of love. This is what Jung meant by the transcendent function in relationship, the ability to hold space for both your own truth and your partner's truth, to find a third way that honors both perspectives. It's not about compromise, which implies sacrifice. It's about integration, which implies wholeness. Their relationship became a container for both of their healing journeys, a safe space where they could explore their shadows without judgment, where they could grow into their fullest selves without fear of losing love. So how do you tell the difference between a relationship that serves your shadow and one that serves your soul? The answer isn't in grand gestures or cosmic coincidences. It's in the small, daily experiences of being with this person. Here are the questions that will reveal the truth. Can I breathe fully around this person? Not just physically, but emotionally. Do you feel like you could take up space? Can you have a bad day without worrying they'll disappear? Can you express an opinion that differs from theirs without fear of losing their approval? Sarah couldn't breathe around David. She was constantly monitoring her words, her tone, her body language. She held her breath when he walked into a room, wondering what mood he'd be in, what version of herself she'd need to present to keep his interest. She found herself speaking more quietly, laughing less loudly, taking up less space in conversations. She became hyper-vigilant to his reactions, always ready to adjust her behavior based on his responses. Marcus could breathe around Elena. Even during conflicts, even when they were working through something difficult, he never felt like he had to hide who he was to keep her love. He could have a bad day at work and come home grumpy without worrying that Elena would interpret it as rejection. He could express political views that differed from hers without fear of judgment. He could take up space in their shared life without feeling like he was imposing. Do I feel seen without having to perform? This is crucial. Shadow love requires a constant performance. You're always auditioning for the role of worthy of love. You become a chameleon, shape-shifting to match what you think they want. In shadow relationships, you're always on, always trying to be interesting, always trying to be attractive, always trying to be enough. You're exhausted from the constant performance, but you're afraid that if you stop performing, they'll lose interest. Real love sees you in your messy, human, imperfect truth and says, "This is who I choose." Elena saw Marcus on his worst days, when he was stressed about work, when he was dealing with his anxiety, when he wasn't being the enlightened version of himself he wanted to be. She saw him when he was cranky in the morning, when he was worried about money, when he was struggling with his depression. And she loved him anyway, not despite these parts of him, but including these parts of him. Do they honor my boundaries or blur them? This is where many people get confused. They think love means having no boundaries, that true intimacy means merging completely with another person. But Jung understood that individuation requires healthy boundaries. You can't know who you are if you don't know where you end and another person begins. Boundaries aren't walls, they're the skin of the soul. They define where you end and where another person begins. They protect your essential self while allowing for genuine intimacy. David constantly pushed Sarah's boundaries. When she said she needed space, he called it playing games. When she expressed discomfort with his behavior, he called her too sensitive. When she tried to maintain friendships he didn't approve of, he made her feel guilty for choosing them over him. He would show up at her workplace unannounced, read her texts when she wasn't looking, and make decisions that affected both of them without consulting her. Marcus and Elena had clear boundaries that they respected. When Elena needed alone time to recharge, Marcus didn't take it personally. He understood that her need for solitude wasn't about rejecting him. It was about maintaining her own sense of self. When Marcus needed to work late, Elena didn't make him feel guilty. She understood that his career was important to him and that supporting his goals was part of loving him. They had boundaries around communication, around time, around other relationships. They didn't try to control each other's friendships or monitor each other's social media. They trusted each other to make good decisions and to communicate honestly about their needs. When conflict arises, do I collapse or do I grow? Conflict is inevitable in any real relationship. The question is, what does conflict teach you about yourself and your partner? In shadow love, conflict is catastrophic. It threatens the entire foundation of the relationship because the relationship is built on the fantasy that you can avoid your triggers by finding the right person. When David and Sarah fought, Sarah would panic. She would apologize for things that weren't her fault, promise to change behaviors that weren't problematic, and lose herself in a desperate attempt to restore harmony. She would have anxiety for days after an argument, replaying every word, analyzing every gesture, convinced that one wrong move would end the relationship. In soul love, conflict is information. It shows you where you still need to grow, where your partner needs to grow, and how you can support each other's healing. When Marcus and Elena had disagreements, they used them as opportunities to understand each other better. They didn't try to win or to be right. They tried to understand. They developed a practice of taking breaks when conversations got heated, of coming back to the discussion when they were both calm, of focusing on understanding rather than being understood. Do I feel more like myself or less like myself? This might be the most important question of all. Jung believed that we are constantly choosing between two paths: the path of individuation, becoming who we truly are, and the path of adaptation, becoming who we think we should be. Shadow relationships demand adaptation. They ask you to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. They reward you for abandoning your authentic self. Soul relationships support individuation. They celebrate your growth, even when it's messy. They encourage your authenticity, even when it's challenging. With David, Sarah became less herself. She stopped writing, stopped expressing her opinions, stopped taking up space. She became a muted version of her former self. With Elena, Marcus became more himself. He rediscovered his love of art, started expressing his creativity again, found the courage to pursue work that felt meaningful rather than just profitable. Does this relationship expand my world or contract it? Shadow relationships tend to become all-consuming. You lose touch with friends, abandon hobbies, neglect other aspects of your life. The relationship becomes your entire world, which creates an unhealthy dependence. Soul relationships expand your world. Your partner encourages your friendships, supports your interests, and celebrates your individual growth. They want you to be a whole person, not just their partner. And finally, do I lose myself in their presence, or do I return to who I am? This is the ultimate test. Sarah lost herself with David. She became a smaller, dimmer version of herself, always adjusting her light to match his comfort level. Marcus found himself with Elena, not in the sense that she completed him, but in the sense that being with her reminded him of who he was beneath all the layers of who he thought he should be. Think about your current relationship or your last significant relationship. Go through these questions honestly. What do your answers tell you? Let me share one more story. This one might be the most important. Jennifer was 32 when she met someone who checked all the boxes. Alex was kind, successful, shared her values, and wanted the same thing she wanted. On paper, it was perfect, but something fell off. Not wrong, exactly, just flat. I keep waiting to feel that spark, she told her therapist. You know, that feeling like you can't live without them. Her therapist, who happened to be trained in Jungian psychology, asked her a question that changed everything. What if the spark you're looking for isn't love, but familiar dysfunction? Jennifer sat with that question for weeks. She realized that all her previous relationships had been roller coasters of intense highs and devastating lows. She had equated love with anxiety, passion with chaos, commitment with the constant fear of loss. She had been addicted to the drama, the uncertainty, the constant need to prove herself worthy of love. She had mistaken the adrenaline of insecurity for the electricity of attraction. Alex didn't trigger her anxiety because Alex was emotionally stable. He didn't create chaos because he was genuinely kind. He didn't threaten to leave because he was actually committed. The spark she was missing wasn't love. It was the adrenaline of trying to earn love from someone who couldn't give it freely. Jennifer's journey taught her that sometimes fated love doesn't feel like a lightning bolt. Sometimes it feels like coming home to yourself. She learned to appreciate the quiet consistency of real love. The way Alex brought her coffee in the morning, the way he listened to her work stories, the way he celebrated her victories without needing to be the center of attention. She learned that peace wasn't boring, it was precious. That stability wasn't stagnant, it was sacred. That being chosen by someone who actually wanted to choose her was more valuable than being chased by someone who was afraid of catching her. Take a moment here. Really take it in. What if the love you're looking for isn't supposed to feel like a constant emergency? What if it's supposed to feel like peace? You don't need to chase love that's meant for you. Read that again. You don't need to chase love that's meant for you. It won't come wrapped in chaos, demanding that you prove your worth through suffering. It won't require you to abandon your values, your friends, your dreams, or your sense of self. Real love, fated love, will come with clarity. You'll know it not because it overwhelms you, but because it grounds you. Not because it completes you, but because it recognizes that you are already complete. If you're holding on to someone and calling it fate, but you're abandoning your truth in the process, then it's not fated love. It's an emotional echo, and that echo won't stop reverberating through your life until you listen to your own voice. Jung spent his life studying the patterns that keep us trapped in unconscious cycles. He found that most of our suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from our refusal to face the parts of ourselves we've disowned. When we project these disowned parts on our romantic partners, we create what feels like fate, but is actually fixation. True fate, Jung believed, is not about finding someone who will complete you. It's about finding someone who will witness your journey of completing yourself. Sarah eventually did this work. She spent 2 years in therapy, learning to recognize her own voice, to trust her own instincts, to love herself without needing external validation. She learned to sit with her own emotions without needing someone else to regulate them. She rediscovered her love of writing, her passion for social justice, her joy in simple pleasures. When she was ready, not when she was desperate, but when she was whole, she met someone who loved her poetry, supported her dreams, and never asked her to be smaller. Marcus and Elena are still together, 7 years later. Their relationship isn't perfect. No relationship is, but it's real. They've supported each other through job changes, family crises, and personal growth. They've learned to love each other's shadows as much as their light. They still trigger each other sometimes. Marcus still occasionally feels abandoned when Elena needs space. Elena still sometimes feels smothered when Marcus is having an anxious day. But they've learned to see these moments as opportunities for healing, not evidence that their love is doomed. Jennifer married Alex, not because she felt that desperate spark, but because she recognized something deeper, a partner who would walk beside her, not ahead of her or behind her, but alongside her as she became who she was meant to be. She learned to appreciate the quiet consistency of real love. The way Alex brought her coffee in the morning, the way he listened to her work stories, the way he celebrated her victories without needing to be the center of attention. These aren't fairy tale endings. They're real-life beginnings. Because the truth about fated love is this. It's not about finding your other half. It's about finding someone who encourages you to become whole. Before you close this video, take a moment to write down 3 things you will never compromise about yourself again. What parts of your truth are non-negotiable? What aspects of your wholeness will you protect? As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. So before asking if they're your destiny, ask yourself if you've truly chosen you. Have you done the work of knowing yourself? Have you integrated your shadow? Have you learned to love yourself without conditions? Have you discovered what it means to be whole, independent of any relationship? Because the real fated love, the kind that transforms and sustains, will never demand your disappearance. It will recognize your wholeness and rise to meet it. And when that happens, you won't need to ask if it's fate. You'll know, not because it feels dramatic or desperate or like you can't live without them. You'll know because it feels like coming home to yourself. If this video helped you see your relationships, past or present, with new clarity, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're ready to dive deeper into Jung's wisdom about love, identity, and becoming who you truly are, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started on this journey together. Remember, you don't need to chase love that's meant for you. You just need to be brave enough to become who you truly are. The right person will recognize that truth and love you for it. The journey of individuation is not easy, but it's the most important work you'll ever do. And when you're ready, when you're whole, fated love will find you. Not as a rescue from your loneliness, but as a celebration of your completeness.